The Gemara tells us that if you teach your friend's child Torah, it is as if you had given birth to them. We learn this from Moshe Rabbeinu teaching the children of Aaron, except that Rashi will point out to us, in Moshe's case, it was far more profound. Ala pasuk, the pasuk in Parashas Bamidbar that says, "Ve'letodus Aaron and Moshe," these are the descendants of Aaron and Moshe. B'yom diber Hashem es Moshe b'Har Sinai, on the day that Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai. Rashi explains, "Ve'letodus Aaron and Moshe," the children of Aaron and Moshe means ve'ina maskera b'nei Aaron. How come it's telling us the children of Moshe and Aaron and only mentioning the names of Aaron's children? V'nikru told us Moshe, yet they are considered like the descendants of Moshe. Why? Torah, because he taught them Torah. Melamed, and from that we can derive any person who teaches his friend's child Torah, then the Torah considers it as if he had given birth to them. And the Mefarshim explain why. Why it is that we learn this specifically in the case of the children of Aaron. Didn't Moshe teach everybody Torah? So the Mefarshim say it's because Moshe taught Aaron's children separately from the rest of the community and in a unique way. And he taught them first before he got to the rest of the Jewish people. As Rashi already told us in Parashas Kisisa, that Moshe Rabbeinu first taught the Torah to Aaron, then he repeated it in front of Aaron and his sons, and then it to the leaders, and then to the community. So Aaron's sons are earlier on in the process. So what's important over here is that this particular teaching, Moshe teaching the children of Aaron, is something Moshe was not required to do. Because we know that Moshe first taught Aaron, and then he called in the sons. Then Aaron now has the information. Actually, he is the one required to teach his children, not Moshe. Therefore, the Mefarshim tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu got an extra unique reward, that he is considered as if he gave birth to Aaron's children because he wasn't required to teach them, but he taught them anyway. Then Rashi continues and he says, the rest of the pasuk says that this is on the day that Hashem spoke to Moshe. There Rashi says, they become the sons of Aaron, his descendants, because he taught them what he had heard from Hashem, and we say Hashem specifically in the way of Gevura, Hashem's strong, powerful voice. The question is, what's Rashi adding? What's Rashi adding to what we already know about this principle that if you teach somebody else's children Torah, it's like you are their spiritual father? What's he adding? They became like his descendants because he taught them what he had learned. Didn't he already tell us this? Didn't he already say that they're called his children because he taught them Torah? And from here we learn that anybody who teaches somebody else's children Torah is considered like their father. So what's Rashi adding? So the Mefarshei Rashi want to explain that Rashi is addressing the flow of the pasuk that doesn't seem to work. Because how do the words that identify when this happened, the day when Hashem spoke to Moshe, how do they come? How is that a flow on or continuation from the beginning of the pasuk, which is Ve'letodus Aaron Gomer? These are the children of Aaron, and it's going to tell us the children of Aaron. So therefore, Mefarish Rashi, that's why Rashi is pointing out for us that these words, the day when Hashem spoke to Moshe, is not linking back to the fact that we were told these are the children of Aaron, but it's actually linking back to the fact that these are the children physically of Aaron, who are also the children spiritually of Moshe. Why? Because these children are also considered the descendants of Moshe, because he taught them Torah, which Rashi already began to tell us in the first Rashi. So therefore the pasuk wants us to know, at which point do the children of Aaron take on the status of being the spiritual children of Moshe? That began on the day that the Eibishter spoke to Moshe, gave him the Torah, which Moshe then transferred to the children of Aaron. And then you might still ask, but why Beyom? Sounding like it's a one-day affair. Only on the day when Hashem spoke to Moshe, that's when they became like his children. Delachira, Harry Moshe limited Bnei Aaron Torah gam b'chol hameshech zman shelachar yom dibra Hashem es Moshe, because we know that Moshe continued to teach the children of Aaron Torah for many years after the day of Matan Torah. In fact, if you think about it, the truth is, most of the teaching of Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu did to the Yidden generally, and specifically to the children of Aaron who were part of the inner circle, only happened much later, after Yom Kippur. After Moshe had been on top of the mountain for 3 sets of 40 days, which is it's more than 4 months after the first time that Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai. That's why I'm saying B'yoim, that it became his spiritual descendants on the day of receiving the Torah, when most of the teaching happened much later. So to that, the Mefarshim offer 2 possible answers, and the Rebbe will show how neither of these answers is actually fully sufficient. So they give 2 suggestions. Number 1 is Be'yom diber amor kan, mashma osei mi yom diber. Even though the word says be, which implies on the day when Hashem spoke, we can understand it to mean from the day when Hashem spoke. And we see precedent for that, when the Torah tells us about things that are left over from the meat and from bread that you can't eat past a particular time. Doesn't mean the leftover in the bread or the meat, it means from the bread or the meat. Therefore, it is grammatically acceptable to say be actually means me. And therefore, from that day and on, Moshe is their spiritual parent. Or Beis, the alternative Mefarshim suggest that what it means is the day that Hashem told Moshe illustrates to us told us that even if a person only teaches one thing to the child of their friend, that person already becomes like their spiritual children. So firstly, neither of those answers is very strong. Each one of them, you think you're really making a stretch of it. You have to say be means may, and that you're saying that it's teaching us that even a little bit of teaching already makes somebody like your spiritual child. Besides that, it'd be difficult to say that that's what Rashi wants to illustrate for 2 reasons. Shaharei Aleph, when we're told the time frame when Aaron's sons became Moshe's spiritual children, because he taught them Torah. Why do we have to know when that began? The message of the story is that such a thing exists. That if you teach somebody Torah, you are their spiritual parent. When it began for Moshe, why is that relevant to Pshat? And an even more important point. Moshe taught the Yidden Torah even before they got to Har Sinai. Before the day that's mentioned in this pasuk, the day of Hashem speaking to Moshe. As Rashi has already told us, that already at Morah, which is a good few weeks before Matan Torah, they were given sections of the Torah to learn. In fact, even before they left Mitzrayim, the Eibush already gave them a whole string of mitzvahs. HaChodesh, which is really complicated information, and Pidyon HaBen, Petach Hamor, Tefillin. And Moshe obviously taught that information to the Jewish people. With that logic, why are Aaron's children not considered to be Moshe's spiritual children already from when they were in Mitzrayim? Why only from the time where Hashem spoke to them at the Matan Torah? And it would be difficult to try and answer this by saying that the special attention that Moshe gave to Aaron's children, told this Moshe Canal, which turned them into his spiritual children more than the rest of the nation, notes that Dafka beside the mission, it'd be a real stretch to say, well, that special attention that Moshe gave to them only began after Yom Kippur and not before. Because whatever logical reason it is that Moshe came up with a particular system of how he was going to teach Torah to the Yidden, and specifically within that system, that Aaron's children would be right up at the beginning, that's something that obviously came into play long before Yom Kippur. Because here it's saying, B'yom, on the day that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people, which is the 6th, or according to another possibility, the 7th of Sivan, already then Moshe is dealing with the children of Aaron differently. Because the pasuk is telling us that is obviously when they became his children. There's no logical reason to think that Moshe would not have given them that unique special attention much earlier, either at Morah or all the way back in the time of Mitzrayim, and not only at the time of the giving of the Torah. So the question is, what happened at the time of the giving of the Torah that gave the children of Aaron this unique status of being the Toldos of Moshe? Now, before we can get there, we're going to pay attention to two other interesting notes about how Rashi teaches his Pirush. There are various things that we could focus on in Rashi's Pirush. We're going to look at two. Aleph. In the first explanation that Rashi gives about this principle that you teach somebody else's child, they become like your child, he uses the words like the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Maile olav akosef ki'ilu yiladoi. The Torah considers that person as if they gave birth to them. So that's pretty clear that we're not suggesting now that these people's children now become your children. Rather, it sounds like the Torah is telling us that the teacher gets a unique reward, which is that it is considered as if they bore those people as their children. That's the first way Rashi proposes it. Whereas in Rashi's second explanation, well, there he says, that Aaron's children became his descendants. And told us Moshe, which implies a fundamental shift in who they are, that they are now considered the descendants of Moshe. So which one is it? Is it like some reward that you get that you're as good as if you gave birth to them? Or do they actually become your children? And Rashi seems to suggest both possibilities in the same story. But to me, Rabbi Yosef, what makes that even more perplexing is Rashi is basing his explanation on the Gemara Sanhedrin. And there it says, there it says, as Rashi says in his first explanation, that anybody who teaches his friend's child Torah, it's considered as if he gave birth to them. Then the Gemara continues to quote our pasuk, and there the Gemara concludes, because Moshe taught Torah to Aaron's children, they are called an extension of his family. In other words, it's as if he gave birth to them. Rashi adds to this a whole new perspective. Not only are Aaron's children also designated in the pasuk as if they were Moshe's children, but Rashi says they became his descendants. We need to understand that. And the last thing we need to understand is, why does Rashi give such a lengthy set of words to convey what should be a fairly simple principle? That Moshe taught them what he had learnt from Hashem's powerful voice. Why do you have to say that? Rashi could have said really simply. In fact, Rashi used a much simpler explanation in his first commentary on this pasuk. He should have just said Torah, that he taught them Torah. Why do we have to know that he heard me? Pi hagvura. How's that adding to the story? And if you're going to say, well, the Torah in the pasuk is using the expression the time where Hashem spoke to Moshe. So Rashi is matching that and also emphasizing that it's not just that he's learning Torah with them, but he's learning what the Eibishter told him. So you want to match Rashi's lashon to the lashon of the Torah? That's also not so clear. Well, in that case, why did Rashi say it's what he learned from Hashem, instead of just saying exactly what the pasuk says, what he heard from Hashem? And Beis, why does he have to use this expression, which is a more abstract way to refer to the Eibishter, when he could have just simply said what he heard from the Eibishter? So the explanation is, what's bothering Rashi over here is a point that we have not yet uncovered, and that is in the language of the Torah and in the language of what the Gemara says. Rashi would be dissatisfied to explain that the message over here is just simply that if a person teaches somebody else's child Torah, it is considered as if they are like your child, a sense of a reward that the person gets. You can't say that because look at the words in the pasuk. These individuals are the children, the descendants of Aaron and Moshe. Told us Moshe Belvad, had the pasuk only said the following are the descendants of Moshe, okay then. You could have said then the word descendants over here is used in a loose sense. It's a borrowed metaphoric term. Because of the fact that Moshe taught them Torah, the Torah will consider it like a type of a reward for the teacher, that these are as if they were his students. And that would be similar to what Rashi explains about Avraham Avinu when it speaks about the souls that he made in Haran, that he brought them under the shelter of the Shekhinah. Therefore, the Torah considers it as if he made them. And there's even a closer example, which is about teaching people, that Rashi quotes, the Torah tells us you should teach them to your children, that actually refers to your students. We find in many places, all places, that students are also called children. So that would have worked if it just said told us Moshe. But it didn't. Here the pasuk said that the children of Aaron are considered the descendants of Aaron and Moshe. There's an equation there. The Torah is referring to Aaron and Moshe in the same breath. Told us Moshe, told us Aaron. That means the pasuk is implying that the people we're about to list as descendants of Aaron are equally descendants of Moshe. That's incredibly strange. Told us Aaron. How could you compare the fact that they are Aaron's children? He told us Aaron, which is their reality. They are the physical descendants of Aaron. The Kachshem told us Moshe, how can you compare that to the fact that you're calling them Moshe's descendants because he taught them Torah? These are completely different kinds of descendants. Hashem kolo ilui shebozeh, as great as it is that you feed somebody spiritually by teaching them and they become like your children, surely teaching a person Torah doesn't fundamentally change the essence of who they are, as opposed to, of course, giving birth to somebody, which gives them their essence. Surely, Rashi says, the best we could come up with is to say, teaching somebody Torah makes it as if they are your children. How does the Torah equate them? Told us Aaron or Moshe as one. That forces Rashi to explain. That's why this pasuk adds words which don't seem to fit with the theme of the pasuk on the day that Hashem spoke to Moshe. Because because here the Torah needs us to know that the Torah Moshe had learned from the Torah that Moshe had taught to Aaron's sons, is the Torah he learned from Hashem. He heard from Hashem. Why is that important? Because the Torah wants us to know that the information, the Torah that Moshe is learning with Aaron's children is what he heard mipi agvura. It has the full force of the Eibishter's voice. And therefore, the force, the strength of the Eibishter's voice makes them now his descendants. In other words, with the force of the Eibishter's word, he actually changes their essence. And they become now literally his descendants, and we'll unpack that. But it's not ke'ilu yeladoi that he gets the credit as if he gave birth to them. They actually become his descendants. How does that happen? So let's go back to the story of Matan Torah and how the Eibishter introduced what Torah was going to do to the Jewish people generally, because that will help us understand what the teaching that Moshe gave to Aaron's children did to them. By way of introduction to Matan Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe Shimsa Bnei Yisrael, the Eibusha told Moshe to convey to the Jewish people, now if you listen to my voice, and you observe my covenant, you will be a treasure to me from all the other nations. You will become a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. In other words, Havei Omer, Shal Yedei Matan Torah Kabbalah Satera, what Abish is conveying to the Yidden via Moshe Rabbeinu is that by accepting the Torah, you change fundamentally. You become a whole new group of people. Prior to Matan Torah, the Jews were a nation among nations. And through the power of the giving of the Torah, we became a different nation. Muvdalim umiyuchadim, separate and unique. Segulam mikol ha'amim, a treasure compared to all other nations. B'yosim b'fchinas mamlechas kohanim v'gei kodesh, a holy nation. Umitam zeh matan Torah b'ifin shakadosh baruch hu his galil ibnei Yisrael b'derech gevura. In order to make that change, the Eibusha didn't just deliver the Torah to the Jewish people, but he revealed himself, and in a very powerful way. There's lightning, there's this ever-increasing sound of a shofar. That revelation of godliness fundamentally changes who the Jewish people are, and they're hearing the message of Torah, the core of Torah, directly from Hashem's infinitely powerful voice. So this shift that happens to the Jewish people, that we now become the treasured nation, that's a result of, and it's contingent on our dedication to Torah. That means that this unique power to fundamentally change who we are, from being ordinary people who belong to a nation like all other nations, into becoming a holy people, that is Hashem's treasure, the koyach to achieve that is embedded within the Torah. That's why Rashi tells us that what Moshe taught the children of Aaron is what he learned pi agvura, not just what he learned in Torah, not just what he learned from Hashem, but what he learned with this full-scale power of transformative energy. Because what Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching Bnei Aaron in their unique sessions that are different to the teaching of the rest of the Jewish people is what Moshe heard directly from Pi HaGvura, from this powerful transformative voice of Hashem. That Moshe Rabbeinu received this directly from the Eibishter. In that Torah is, in a much more accessible way, the full power and force of what Torah does. The capacity of Torah to altogether change who the Jewish person is. So therefore, in the same way as the Torah fundamentally changed the Jewish people, they're now new people with a new identity who are the treasured nation of Hashem. When Moshe teaches Bnei Aaron this unique form of Torah, it changes them. They're now new, unique people who they're not who they were before. They're not just the physical descendants of Aaron, they are now the descendants of Moshe as well. So, based on what we said previously, the fact that Rashi points this out from the wording of the pasuk, because the Torah equated the descendants of Aaron and the descendants of Moshe. Therefore, we know that it's not just some kind of a reward that Hashem gave him. You did such a good job of teaching these people, we'll consider it as if they're your children, but they actually became his descendants. That will also help us understand why the end of this pasuk does not say that this shift happened to the children of Aaron from the day they began to learn Torah when Moshe was on Har Sinai, but rather it happened on the day that Moshe was at Har Sinai. Because in the same way as physical birth is not a repetitive process, it happens once. At the moment of birth, that is the only moment of birth. And after birth, the only development that happens is growth. The child becomes bigger and stronger and more developed. The identical thing happens in spiritual birth. That shift, that incredible upgrade of the children of Aaron to become children of Moshe happens once. It happens at the first time that Moshe exposes the children of Aaron to the experience of how he learned Torah directly from Hashem. Whereas all the subsequent teaching that Moshe shares with the children of Aaron doesn't have that same transformative effect because the transformation has already happened. The rest of the time that he's teaching them Torah, it's no different to anybody else who teaches Torah to the child of his friend, which is given the reward as if he gave birth to him, and we'll talk about that in greater detail shortly. The only thing is, there is a question, if we're saying that this is something that happened right at the beginning, if the moment that changes the stature and the status of Aaron's sons to become Moshe's descendants is at the moment of the giving of the Torah, the whole Jewish nation was there at that moment. The whole Jewish nation heard the same things from Moshe, surely. They heard, they all heard the Eibush say the 10 all incorporated in a single statement, and then independently there's two specific mitzvahs which we heard directly from Hashem. Surely that transformed everybody, that we all became different people at the moment that we all heard directly from Hashem the words of the whole Torah encapsulated. So what uniqueness do the children of Aaron now get? Because at some subsequent point, Moshe Rabbeinu reviews for them what he heard from the Eibishter. But everybody heard from the Eibishter. That's why Rashi tells us specifically that Moshe taught them what he learnt from Hashem. And that's different to everybody else. If you want to have this transformational impact on somebody through learning Torah, you can't just hear the words. Yes, we all heard Hashem's voice at Har Sinai. That does not make this fundamental transformation. Just to have heard the Eibush speak out the Aseret HaDibros, which is something never to be repeated in the course of history, and is definitely very powerful, but it doesn't have this transformational impact. There has to be another phase, a very important phase. The person has to learn the Torah. It has to become part of them, and then it could transform them. That transformation only happens later on when Moshe starts to teach them, the children of Aaron, what he personally experienced from the Eibishter's voice. In other words, not only did Moshe have to share the other 8 dibros to the Jewish people because we couldn't handle the intensity of Hashem's voice, Moshe Rabbeinu's responsibility was to teach everybody all of the Aseret HaDibros, not only the ones that did not get to hear directly from Hashem. And he did that especially uniquely with the children of Aaron to the extent that it was a transformational experience for them. They learned what Moshe had learned from Hashem in a very direct, personal way, and therefore transformed them completely. And they are now the physical descendants of Aaron and the spiritual descendants of Moshe. There's a question here. See, originally we thought that Kilu Yoladoi means if you teach somebody else's child Torah, then the Eibishter rewards you with the status as if you gave birth to them. And that would actually make sense that, Moshe has the status with regards to the children of Aaron. If we went with that thinking that because Moshe gave special attention to Aaron's children and he learnt with them what he had learned and he's being rewarded for that it's as if they're his children, then we could understand why it's only Aaron's children who get that unique status. Because despite the fact that Moshe learned Torah with everybody, the way he learned Torah with Aaron's children is unique. Why? Because you might remember right at the beginning of the Sikha, we said, Moshe Rabbeinu teaching Aaron's children is something that was not required because Aaron already had the information and he was required to teach his children. Whereas the rest of the Bnei Yisrael, who else is going to teach them? Moshe has to teach them. So therefore, if you do something beyond what is required, then you can expect a unique reward. So if to get the status of being like the spiritual father of somebody because you taught them Torah, is because you went to the extra mile, that would make sense. But Rashi is saying that's not what happened. Rashi is saying not only was Moshe rewarded with the status of being their spiritual father, but that they actually became his descendants spiritually. We've now explained that because Moshe shared with them what he had heard from Hashem, therefore it is as if they went through a spiritual birth. And in a moment, it doesn't make any sense. If it's all about Moshe sharing what the Eibusha had given him, which nobody else has access to, then what's the difference if he's required to teach them or not required to teach them? Then surely, back to square one, if Moshe taught the whole Jewish nation what he heard from Hashem, which he did, why are they not considered all of them Moshe's spiritual children? Why is it only Aaron's sons? You can't say because Moshe went beyond the letter of the law, because that's not how we're explaining what the transformation is. So the explanation is So the answer is this: if you teach somebody Torah, and they therefore become like your children, it's not because of you. It's not because you're a great teacher, it's because Torah is so powerful. Because Torah has the mipi hagvura within it, the Eibusha's intense power that allows these transformative experiences. Therefore, if you are teaching Torah to somebody else, even if you're at that level that you're teaching as you heard it from Sinai, because you have to, then there's no question about it that it is a form of birthing that person into learning. But it's not you who's birthing that person. It's the Torah that's birthing that person. It's the Torah that's empowering them. It's the Torah that's transforming them. And you just happen to be the conduit. A great example of that would be that the plagues in Egypt are, the Eibusha considers them my signs, in spite of the fact that Moshe is the one who's actually doing them, because Moshe is just a conduit. It's not his power, it's not his signs. He's just, the Eibusha says, raise your staff, he raises his staff. Throw the ashes, he throws the ashes. And then the miracles happen. And therefore, because the Torah is the one that's what's transforming this person, we'll be, so to speak, grateful to the teacher and give him a reward as if he was the one who made them into the spiritual children. He didn't really, the Torah did, but we'll reward him as if he did. But Moshe Rabbeinu is now teaching Aaron's sons where he does not have the chiyuv to do it. And he's pushing himself beyond the requirement of the law. In other words, he is voluntarily choosing to teach Torah where he is not required to teach Torah. Then we could say he is the one giving them this hoilada, giving them this new metzias, and therefore they are considered his children. And there's still one last thing we have to understand. It's pretty clear now that the only person who has the capacity to have students become literally his spiritual descendants is Moshe, because he heard directly from Hashem. Which is what empowered him through his teaching to rebirth them, to give them this whole new metzias. Only Moshe has that power. And not only Moshe, only on that specific day. Only on that one day when he had the full power of starting the process of teaching Aaron's children. If that's the case, if Moshe is the example to the rest of us, how could Moshe be the one who teaches us that any person who teaches their friend's child Torah is considered as if they gave birth to them? We are not Moshe. We didn't hear Mepi Agvura. We were not there on that day. The answer is this. Let's say that were the case, that the only person in the whole of history who could ever empower somebody to become their spiritual descendants by virtue of teaching them Torah is Moshe. Then that would mean then it would basically be that the Torah is telling us about Moshe just by way of interest, as a story that happened, as a once-off, and and the Torah would be effectively highlighting that only Moshe has this capacity and this power. When you read the simple understanding of a pasuk, when you read something in Torah, wherever possible, you have to assume that the Torah is teaching us a lesson. It's not telling us a piece of history. As Rashi tells us multiple times, that the purpose of a pasuk is to teach us, not just to say, here, fun fact, Moshe Rabbeinu did this. Therefore Rashi says also in our case, yes, Rashi says, the fact that to have the real impact of truly transforming somebody so that they become literally your spiritual descendants is something only Moshe could achieve because he heard it directly from Hashem. And that could only happen once on the day that he learned. Nevertheless, the Torah tells us this information, so we'd learn that any time that a person teaches his fellow Yid, his fellow Jew's child Torah, it's as if he gave birth. In other words, there's a lesson which says you're not going to be at Moshe's level, and we're not going to do it in the way Moshe did, but we'll have some degree of ki'ilu yelodai. It's as if we gave birth. And the reason is because every bit of Torah that any one of us will ever teach at any point in time to any person is actually directly from Hashem's voice. So therefore, despite the fact that the teacher did not hear it directly from Hashem like Moshe did, and it's even possible that the person you're teaching knows information of Torah already from beforehand. The greatness is that the Eibusher rewards the person who taught the Torah that he is considered as if he achieved what Moshe did, as if he gave birth to this person. By the way, you could note over here that Rashi is pointing out that it's the child of your friend, not teaching your friend. So therefore, Rashi is illustrating to us what kind of learning does it take to be considered like I gave birth to somebody. We're talking about somebody who's not, so to speak, on their own, but somebody who is the child of your friend, meaning to say, there's obviously somebody already that started the education of this child. It's not a child floating around in the middle of nowhere. So what's the message? Because you're now starting a process of learning for this child, even if the child has previous learning, even if the child has access to education. You're starting a process of learning with them. That is considered to you as if you started a hilada, as if you gave birth to them. And by the way, this gives us a lesson about another teaching which we have in Pirkei Avos, in the 6th parak, where it tells us about the greatness of a person who teaches something in the name of who they learnt it from, which is so important and powerful that it's considered as if the person, well, not only considered as that person then brings geula to the world. What's so great about quoting your sources? When a person quotes a Torah teaching in the name of who they learnt it from, what that person is doing is highlighting the fact that Torah is something which is passed down through the generations. We don't thumbsuck the Torah. The person is basically saying, I learned this from my teacher, who learned it from his teacher, implying that it goes all the way back to Moshe, who heard it from Hashem directly, which is critical. By quoting our source, which links us through the generations all the way back to Moshe, who heard it directly from Hashem. That brings into the story, that brings into the Torah that he's teaching, that power of Mipi Agvura. And that in turn allows the person to imbue that sense of rebirth into the person that they're teaching and to get the status as if we gave birth to them. We could say it's even more than that. Not only does it have this impact on that individual, but it brings redemption to the entire world. As we see in many places, starting from the Nevuah of Yecheskel, that the principle of Geula is associated with power and with birth. Golus is like a pregnancy and Geula like a birth. And so therefore, not only do we bring this awakening to the person we're teaching, but we actually bring Geula to the world. As we've pointed out, unless you Moshe Rabbeinu hearing it directly from Hashem, not everybody who gets to teach Torah to somebody else really rebirths them as a whole new being. Yet, Torah, which is absolute truth, says that when you teach somebody else's child, it's like you giving birth to them. You can be sure that this is not some kind of superficial, loose connection between two principles. But it means on some deep level, you literally are birthing that person. What does that mean? The explanation is simple. When a person learns Torah, they're alive, and chas v'shalom the opposite. We know that the punishment for a person who wastes time where they could be learning Torah is that the person who disgraces Hashem by not learning his Torah deserves to be chas v'shalom cut off from the source of life. Why is that? Because Torah is our life. Like the famous mashal of Rabbi Akiva, if we are displaced, we're disconnected from Torah, it's like fish out of the water. When you plug into that the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that at every nanosecond the Eibusher completely recreates every single being. Then if I do learn Torah, which means I escape that chas v'shalom being cut off from the source of life, it's not just that I'm avoiding something negative. It's not only that I've avoided or been protected from losing the connection. It's something positive. In the next moment, because I'm learning Torah, and because somebody else got me to learn Torah, therefore in the next moment, Eibush is going to renew my lease on life, renew my lifeline. Therefore, any person who teaches his friend's child Torah, it is considered as if he gave birth to them, because every time you learn with a person, no matter who they are, you then link that person back to the source of their life. It's like at that moment you're giving them birth, because at that moment the Eibush is going to make them live again. And it's at that moment, you are the cause for the Eibishter to recreate that person. At that moment, you are literally, so to speak, giving birth to them. No doubt, by doing that, we not only bring chayas to each other, but as the Mishnah says, maybe geula lo olam.